Hey, what's up, sports fans? Welcome to Common Sense Sports Talk. My name is Andrew Freeman, and with 5 weeks down in the 2019 NFL season, in this episode, what I'm going to be doing is kind of recapping the sort of quarter points in the NFL regular season. I know technically it would be through week 4, but with 17 weeks in the NFL season, I thought it would be right to kind of do this at week 5, at the conclusion of week 5. So what I'm going to be doing for this video here is I'm going to be giving you guys my 5 major storylines to follow so far through the NFL regular season. The 3 biggest surprises, either a team or a player that has really impressed me so far this year. My 3 biggest disappointments, again, 3 teams or players that I just have really let me down so far this year. And then I'm going to do my award predictions for the 2019 season just based off of the information allowed to me so far in the first few games of the season, the first month or so of the season. And this is, again, now that we're kind of through the first month of the year, through September, some of the pretenders and contenders are starting to separate themselves from each other, and we're starting to see an actual playoff picture kind of play out as teams kind of figure out who they are, and we start to figure out how these teams are going to be long-term this season. So it's exciting to see, and without further ado, let's get to the major storylines so far this year. And we have to start with the quarterbacks and all the craziness that has ensued with injuries and multiple guys getting replaced and some of these young guys stepping up. It's really been insane to see all the turnover at the quarterback position. So far this season, 9 teams have started multiple quarterbacks this year. When you look at some of the guys that have been injured and missed some time there, obviously it goes to the big names such as Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, Nick Foles getting injured in week 1. And then you have guys like Cam Newton, who is dealing with that foot injury that we don't know how long he's going to be out. Sam Darnold has missed a few weeks due to mono. And then much recently, Mitchell Trubisky injured his shoulder, and he's going to be out for, we're not sure how long, but he at least missed 1 game against the Raiders this past week. So you have that going on there. And then there are other quarterbacks that, some veteran guys that have been benched so far for younger players. You look at Eli Manning with the New York Giants. It took 2 weeks for the Giants to pull the plug there and go with Daniel Jones. And, it's looking like a good move there and kind of making you wonder, maybe they should have gone to Daniel Jones to start the season, but I regress there. Ryan Fitzpatrick in Miami getting benched for Josh Rosen. Again, same situation here where really, there was really no reason for Ryan Fitzpatrick to be starting out there. Josh Rosen looks like completely the better player than Fitzpatrick, and all those first 2 games was basically a waste of time for the Dolphins. You can make the argument that this entire season is a waste of time for the Dolphins, but it is what it is. Basically, a lot of turnover at the quarterback position, and that makes it, a bit more exciting, I think, in the NFL, because really this league is defined by quarterback play, and if you don't have a quarterback, that can really tank your season. And we're starting to see some of these younger guys step in to starting roles and really start to ball out here. And obviously the big names when you think of those guys are guys like Gardner Minshew with the Jaguars, replacing Nick Foles, who has completely revitalized that franchise. The Jaguars looked dead after the first 2 weeks of the season after starting off 0-2. And Gardner Minshew has really added a spark to that team. You got to love what you've seen out of him. And really a 6th-round pick to be able to play that well, very exciting for the Jaguars. They might have a guy who, they tried Blake Bortles for such a long time. They really haven't had a franchise quarterback since Mark Brunell in the early 90s or late 90s and early 2000s. Gardner Minshew, I don't want to overreact because it's only been a few weeks, but he looks like he could be a guy that the Jaguars could build around long term. And it puts into question what is going to happen when Nick Foles gets back healthy later this season. Do they stick with a guy like Minshew? If this Jaguars team continues to win and play competitively and he continues to play well, that's definitely a discussion worth having. But I talked about Eli Manning getting benched earlier in this episode. Daniel Jones for the Giants has looked pretty darn good so far as a starter. He had a great preseason, and he was hyped up during that entire process, coming off of being booed at the draft, and a lot of Giants fans and a lot of people, including myself, the NFL, kind of doubting him as a guy that should have been drafted at the 6th overall selection. And he has looked every bit of a franchise quarterback the Giants have needed with Eli Manning aging and kind of being washed up over the past few years. He's added a spark again to this franchise. He had that incredible come from behind victory against Tampa Bay in his first start, really giving you a sense of who he is and what his potential is as a player. Hasn't really played as well in the past couple of weeks, but again, he's a rookie. You expect to see some growing pains and some struggles. Bottom line is, if you're the Giants, I think you have to be pretty happy with what you have in him so far and what he's showing. And he's a guy that certainly looks like he's on track to being a franchise type of quarterback long term. Look at some other backups that have stepped up. Kyle Allen with the Panthers. He's been pretty efficient so far, filling in for Cam Newton. Again, I think one of the reasons why they've been content to let Cam Newton sit on the bench is because Kyle Allen has actually looked better than Cam Newton in terms of executing Norv Turner's offense. Certainly helped out by Christian McCaffrey, who I'll get to him later. He's having an absolutely bonkers year so far. But Kyle Allen looks comfortable in his offense and very efficient as well in terms of just managing the game. And the Carolina Panthers, they've won 3 in a row so far now that he's been the starter. So definitely something to look out for there. And then the last guy that we got to talk about is Teddy Bridgewater, who's looked excellent so far, filling in for Drew Brees with the Saints, really buying some time for this team before they get their franchise quarterback back in a few weeks here with that thumb injury. Bridgewater, he didn't do anything spectacular in his first few outings as a starter. Was really used as a game manager, lots of short passes, lots of dump offs to Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas. And then the defense and special teams kind of won them those games. It was a formula that definitely worked for them. But in this last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he really showed out, throwing 4 touchdown passes in the game, taking shots down the field, which is something that I've always questioned about Teddy Bridgewater is can he throw the ball in the intermediate and deep level of the field? I know he's always been efficient in terms of managing the game, avoiding turnovers, and keeping the offense on schedule with checkdowns and short passes. But it was those deeper plays down the field that I always felt like he was kind of limited in. And he definitely proved it in that game that he can go out there and he can sling it and win a game with his arm. Great stuff for the Saints. This is a team that looks like they're the favorite so far in the NFC. They look like the most well-rounded team so far. And if he can play solid for another couple of weeks here before Drew Brees gets back healthy and win them a few more games, they are set up to get the number 1 seed in the NFC and possibly get to a Super Bowl once again. So good stuff for the Saints with Teddy Bridgewater there. The next storyline to kind of follow this year has been the Dolphins and the fact that they are just blatantly tanking a la the Philadelphia 76ers in the NBA a few years ago with Trust the Process. They're doing the same thing, trading away guys like Laramie Tunsil and Mika Fitzpatrick for multiple first-round picks. That certainly doesn't help you in the short term, and you can see that so far with an 0-4 record and a negative 137-point differential, which is the worst point differential through 4 games in NFL history. That's worse than the 2007 Detroit Lions. That's worse than the 2017 Cleveland Browns. That's worse than some of those Tampa Bay Buccaneer teams in the 70s that didn't win a game. I think they lost their first 26 games in the mid-70s. Just awful play so far from this Dolphins team. And I feel really bad for a guy like Josh Rosen, who I mentioned earlier has looked pretty good so far in his first few starts as a Dolphin, but you really can't tell based off of who he has around him and the coaching staff that he's been kind of stuck with. This is the second situation in a row that has kind of been really bad for his overall progression and development as a potential franchise quarterback. And it's frustrating because I can relate this to, as a Bears fan, to 2017 when Mitchell Trubisky was taken by the Bears and he went to a situation where a coaching staff didn't really want him, didn't really trust him, and didn't really want to give him the keys to a certain degree. Obviously, the GM wanted to build around him to a certain extent. We're kind of seeing that with guys like Josh Rosen and even to another extent, Dwayne Haskins in Washington, where Jay Gruden just got fired after they started 0-5. These are 2 situations where, it just isn't a great situation for the quarterback to develop and prosper into a long-term franchise quarterback starter for those teams. I mean, thankfully for the Bears, they got Matt Nagy in there, who I know there's been some problems so far, and I'll get to those later with the offense this season. But he was able to develop Mitch Trubisky to a certain extent, even though we're starting to see him kind of regress a little bit this year. I'm just hoping that Josh Rosen and Dwayne Haskins can get a coaching staff in there and get into a situation where they have people in the building that actually want to build around them and believe in them. Because Josh Rosen, the stats don't show how good he's played so far. He's played better than I think the stats will indicate, and he's shown some signs that he can be a guy that if you can get some talent around him, I don't think the Dolphins necessarily have to draft a quarterback next season. I think it is worth it to try and build a team around Josh Rosen for at least one more year and see what he can do with some guys that can actually play at the NFL level. But overall, when I look at the Dolphins team, this team is going to own 16 this year. I'm 100% confident in making that prediction right now. They do not look competitive. They look like they give up after the first quarter or so once the game goes wrong for them. In their most competitive contest against the Cowboys and Chargers, they were competitive in the first half, but then the floodgates kind of opened in the second half when the lack of talent kind of showed. And, yeah, this team is just really bad. And Miami fans, you're going to have to get through it for another year, maybe 2 more years, because this team is a long way away from actually being competitive, I think, in the NFL. Speaking of being competitive in the NFL, there's a lot of close divisions to kind of keep track of so far. A lot of divisions that are going to be in flux throughout the season. I have to start with the AFC South. All these teams are at least 2-3 or 3-2, and they all have a shot at winning the division so far. You look at the Texans and the Colts, obviously they look like the 2 best teams in the division. The Titans have been the most inconsistent, same as last year, where one week they'll go out there and they will absolutely boat race an opponent, and Marcus Mariota will throw for 3 touchdowns, and defense will get a bunch of turnovers and stuff like that. And then the very next week, Marcus Mariota looks like a shell of himself. He looks really bad. They can't run the ball. The defense gives up a bunch of big plays. We're seeing that trend again this year, so we'll have to keep track of that this season. And then you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars again. They've kind of rallied around Gardner Minshew as their guy at quarterback. Their defense still hasn't played great so far, like I kind of predicted before the season. I saw this defense starting to continue to regress and continue to go in a downward spiral, even though they did have that great game against the Titans where they had, I believe, 9 or 10 sacks, and Calais Campbell was in the backfield the entire game. But that's a very interesting division to watch. I don't think any team that in that division is necessarily great. I think they're all solid teams. The Colts, obviously, they're a well-rounded team, but they lack star power on defense. And Jacoby Brissett, while he's a solid quarterback, he isn't necessarily a difference maker at that position. He does a good job of game managing and putting the Colts in a good position to where they're always going to be in the game, but he's not a guy that's going to go out there and win you the game. So, and then the Texans, it really goes as Deshaun Watson and that offensive line goes. If Deshaun Watson's protected and he's allowed to have time to hit DeAndre Hopkins and some of those other weapons on that offense, then they're going to put up a lot of points and they're going to win. If he's under duress the entire game, we've seen it this year where in the couple of instances where he hasn't had protection and he's gotten hit a lot and the offense sputters, they haven't been able to recover from that. So interesting division to watch there. But another one to watch is the NFC North, who this division is looking like the black and blue division once again. This is a very close race so far. You have the Packers so far, they're leading the way at 4-1. And then the Minnesota Vikings and Bears are both at 3-2. And then the Detroit Lions are 2-1 right now. They had that tie in week 1 to the Arizona Cardinals. Other than that, they've looked really good so far in this season. I'll get more on them later. But defense, that was a big calling card for this division in the past. And we're starting to see that kind of crop up now where every single team has a defense that is capable of winning and taking over a game. Look at the Packers. They're leading the NFL in takeaways right now. I believe they're up there in sacks as well. They might even be the leaders in sacks right now. Of course, we know about the Bears defense. I still think that defense is the best in football when they're locked in. They're statistically they're top 3, top 5 right now. I think as the season goes along, they'll kind of make their way up the ranks into that number 1, number 2 category there because the Patriots, I'll get to them later, Their defense has been excellent so far this year. And then the Vikings, we know they have a great defense as well, led by Mike Zimmer and all the talent there. And then Detroit, their defense has been not great so far, but definitely solid. They're definitely a top 10 to 15-ish units on that side of the ball. This is going to be a very competitive division the entire year. I feel like the winner of this division is probably going to have to be 10-6, 9-7 maybe, because as these teams start to face each other once the division games start coming up here and these teams start facing each other, we're going to see them split a lot more matchups than you'd think, I think. So very interesting division to watch. And then the last one I want to kind of take a look at is the NFC West. It's really a 3-team race. I'm not really counting the Arizona Cardinals. They're bad. They're not involved in this. Obviously, they're concerned about the development of Kyler Murray and that offense. Hopefully that works out for them. But this is really about the San Francisco 49ers, the Los Angeles Rams, and the Seattle Seahawks. All three of those teams look like legitimate contenders in the NFC right now, although I will say that I'm not as high on the San Francisco 49ers as of right now. I'm not sure if they're 100% legit. I think they're, again, I'll get to them later when I get to my three biggest surprises, but they look pretty good so far. I'm not 100% buying in as of yet. To me, the favorite in that division is the Seattle Seahawks. I think they have everything going for them right now. Russell Wilson is playing at an insane level. He might be the best quarterback in football at this moment. They have some weapons on the outside. They have a dominant running game. Their defense, while not great necessarily, is pretty good in spurts here and there. I think they're good enough to definitely go on a playoff run. And then the Rams, I don't know what to think about them. Jared Goff is, again, I think he's starting to prove right now this year that the last couple of years was a lot of McVay being just an excellent coach and kind of scheming ways for him to be productive in the passing game. And now that teams are kind of scheming around that McVay system, we're starting to see the flaws in Jared Goff. Todd Gurley isn't the same. That running game isn't the same. But they're still an incredibly talented team. They're going to be in that race in the NFC West the entire year. They can fix their defensive woes, especially in the secondary. Just too many explosive plays in the secondary given up, and there's too much talent on this defense, period, for them to be as bad as they are on defense, giving up 55 points to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and all that other nonsense that we saw last year as well. But these are three teams that are going to be in the race all year long, and I'm really excited to see how that division works out. In the AFC, for my fourth storyline, really when you look at that conference as a whole, it's a lot of mediocre teams, and then there's the Patriots and the Chiefs, who are clearly the two favorites in this conference. The Patriots, Tom Brady is playing, good football once again. Even at the age of 42, he's very efficient. He's lacking weapons in the passing game, but he's still getting it done there. But the biggest factor for this team has been their defense. They have statistically the best defense in the NFL, and this really isn't even close. They're giving up less than 7 points per game. And to put that in perspective, that is better than the 85 Bears, and that's better than the 2000 Ravens. That's better than the 2015 Broncos, 2013 Seahawks. That is better than some of the historic defenses in the NFL so far. I know they haven't played anybody. I know the level of quarterbacks that they've played has been subpar at best. But this is a passing league. This is an offensive trending league where it's a lot easier to score. And the fact that they're giving up less than a touchdown a game, that's just mind-blowing to me. And they're just playing really good football right now. Once again, they look like the clear favorites in the AFC East and in the AFC as a whole, because I think their offense will start to figure it out as they get healthier and as the season goes along, because they have some injuries on the offensive line and in the receiving core that have kind of hampered what they can do. But we saw week one that this offense, when it's healthy and it has all of its pieces, they're capable of doing a lot of damage. Speaking of offense, the Chiefs, I mentioned, are the other clear favorite in this conference. Has nothing to do with their defense. Their defense is still as bad as it once was, although Tyrann Mathieu and Chris Jones are definitely showing out there, and they're trying to do their best to carry this defense, but they just aren't a very good unit. But that doesn't seem to matter, because Patrick Mahomes and this Chiefs offense, other than this last week against the Colts, where the Colts did a really good job in that game of kind of shutting down that offense, Mahomes and this Chiefs team, they just, other than against the Colts, they just continue to score at will and just put up a bunch of points. Mahomes looks as good as ever. He's incredible. He's probably the best talent in the NFL at the quarterback position at this moment. And you just have to think that as the season goes along, that offense is just going to get back on track when they get guys like Tyreek Hill back. They get Eric Fisher back at left tackle. They're going to continue to roll. I'm not worried about their offense whatsoever. They've had a couple of down weeks against the Lions and the Colts, but I think those games are going to be flukes, I think, overall when we look at the rest of this year as the season goes along. So those are the two favorites right now. I can't wait for those two teams to play each other later this season. And that game might define who gets home field advantage in the AFC once the playoffs come around. So that's definitely one storyline to look out for later this year as that comes around. And then the last storyline I want to talk about before getting to some of my other topics for this episode is the pass interference rule. It's just a complete mess. Either they just have to get rid of it or they need to seriously address it in the offseason because it's been a problem so far. Similar to some of the rules regarding the catching the football for receivers for about 3 or 4 stretch from 2011 to 2015, where for the longest time we had no idea what a catch was. We're starting to see this prop up again with the pass interference rule where it's frustrating as a fan. I'm sure it is even more so for coaches and players that we don't know what a pass interference is anymore, and we don't know what constitutes something that's worth challenging for a non-call or a called pass interference or what's not worth challenging at this point. It's just been frustrating. It stops the flow of the game whenever a challenge is thrown, and it's clear that the refs and the league office are doing everything they can to not reverse these calls, whether it's a no call or a call pass interference on the field. They're not reversing it as much as they possibly can, even when, to my observation, a play can look like it's totally, should be reversed on replay. They're not doing that. It's pretty clear that this rule was basically lip service to the NFC Championship last year. Nothing's really going to be changing whatsoever. They don't want to embarrass the officials on the field. It's pretty clear that they're not concerned with getting it right by the rule of the law. They're going to continue to kind of prop up this subjectivity and, this idea that if it's not conclusive evidence, quote unquote, that they can't change it. It's frustrating. I don't want to deal with this for the entire season long. They need to either get rid of it this offseason or they need to seriously fix it and address this either this year or after this year because it's a problem and it's messing with teams right now. Really officiating across the entire league, across the board, has been frustrating to watch so far this season, and it's cost some teams some games. So I'm hoping that the NFL fixes this because it's hard enough to win in the NFL, but when you don't know what the rules are and the refereeing is controlling the game by throwing flags every other play, it just becomes really difficult to go out there, sustain momentum in a game, and go out there and win the game just by your talent and your coaching alone. So I'm hoping they fix this, but we'll see. So moving on, I want to go to my biggest surprises so far this season. Obviously, the San Francisco 49ers starting off 4-0. They're my biggest surprise so far this year. Now, I thought they would be pretty good this season, a lot more competitive, but I did not expect them to be this good coming out of the gates. The offense looks pretty solid now that Jimmy Garoppolo is back healthy. He hasn't played his best football so far. It looks like to me watching him that he's still favoring that knee a little bit when he's throwing the ball. A lot of balls are kind of being babied a little bit. He's short on a lot of throws. But that running game that they have in San Francisco is almost unstoppable. They have a good offensive line. Kyle Shanahan's the best schemer at running the ball in the entire NFL, and it's not even close. He develops the best running scheme in football by far. And then they have the running back talents with Matt Breida and Tevin Coleman to be able to pound the ball 40 times a game and just impose their will on opposing teams. That performance they had on Monday night against the Browns was an absolute clinic in how to run the football in the modern-day NFL. They look really good. And their defense, while I still have some concerns about their secondary, they're starting to force a lot more turnovers now because that front seven is legit with Nick Bosa, Dee Ford, some of the other players, DeForest Buckner, Fred Warner at the linebacking position. They have a lot of talent in that front seven. They look really good so far. They're flying around the football field. They're getting pressure on opposing teams' quarterbacks, and they're making life really tough for their opposition so far this season. And it's really helping them play complementary football because the offense hasn't always been great this year. They've turned the ball over quite a bit. Again, like I said, Jimmy G hasn't looked that great so far. He still looks like he's kind of trying to work his way back from that knee injury. But if their defense can continue to play like they have so far this year, they're going to be very good, and they're going to be in the mix in the NFC West all season long. The next team I want to look at is the Detroit Lions. You know, they had that weird game where they kind of blew it against the Arizona Cardinals in week 1. Even though they didn't lose, it kind of felt like a loss at that time because of the way that they were basically controlling the game for the first 55 minutes, and then they just completely collapsed in the last 5 minutes and in overtime to allow that game to be a tie when it really – the Arizona Cardinals had no business being in that game. They kind of blew it. But since then, you know, they go on the road and they beat a very talented Philadelphia Eagles team. They play a Kansas City Chiefs team very tough on their home field and really could have won that game if the ball would have bounced their way a few times. You know, there was a bunch of fumbles in the third quarter of that game that really decided the outcome. And if they're able to either hold on to the ball in some of the situation or the ball bounces their way, we're talking about this team being undefeated at this point because really, when you look at that game as a whole, they were the better team on a down-to-down basis against the Kansas City Chiefs. They looked like the better team out there, and they really frustrated Patrick Mahomes in the passing game. Mahomes was not able to get a lot of the deep shots down the field. He was dealing with pressure in his face on a consistent basis in that game. The Detroit Lions look very good right now. They also had another win at home against the Chargers where that was a low-scoring game, but they were able to kind of overcome that, a lead by the Chargers late in that game and kind of get a come-from-behind victory. The Lions look very good. And like I mentioned before, they're in the mix so far in the NFC North. That NFC North is just stacked right now. But my last surprise has to go to Shaquille Barrett, outside linebacker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who looks like a Defensive Player of the Year candidate so far. He leads the league with 9 sacks and 7 tackles for loss so far this year. And on a bigger scale, he's kind of been the turning point for this Buccaneers defense, where last year they were one of the 3 or 4 worst in all of football. And he's really helped turn them around. And I did not expect that. He's a guy playing on a 1-year contract. A lot of teams did not want him. The Denver Broncos, the team that he was on last year, they didn't want to keep him. They would rather go with other options in free agency rather than sign him to an extension. And he wanted to go to a place where he's going to get playing time. That's why he chose Tampa Bay ultimately, because he was guaranteed to have a role on this defense. And with Todd Bowles as the defensive coordinator, allowing him to kind of do whatever he wants as a pass rusher, Shaquille Barrett has really, really looked fantastic. I've always been a fan of him going back to his earlier days in Denver, where he was a key part as a situational pass rusher on that 2015 defense for the Broncos. And he just looks like a totally different player now that he's got a full-time role in this defense. He looks absolutely fantastic. Hopefully he can keep it up for the remainder of the season. I think he's going to start to kind of play down to earth a little bit as teams start to adjust to his level of play and start to game plan around him. I don't think he has the natural talent to take over a game like a guy like Von Miller or Khalil Mack or Myles Garrett. He's not that type of level of a player, but he continues to produce. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're a competitive team once again because of his play on defense. So that's definitely been something to see. In terms of my 3 biggest disappointments so far this year, sticking with the Broncos defense, they've been really disappointing for me. Through the first 3 games of this year, they didn't record a sack or a turnover. And this is just weird because they have a guy in Vic Fangio who's one of the best defensive coordinators in all of football, yet they continue to allow a bunch of late leads to go against them. They've already allowed 2 last-second game-winning drives this year against the Bears and the Jaguars. And yeah, this defense just hasn't looked good, and it's not going to get much better now that Bradley Chubb is out for the year with a torn ACL. I thought this defense going into the season was going to be one of the top 5 in the NFL. With you look at some of the talent they had in the front 7 with Von Miller and Bradley Chubb as your edge rushers. Neither of them have been very productive so far this year. They have holes in the secondary. Their linebacking core is not as talented. I knew that was a weakness of their defense, but I didn't think it would be as big of a deal as it has been for this defense so far. And I think that's one thing we have to find out, about the Vic Fangio defense and his style as a defensive coordinator. He relies on his linebackers quite a bit to make plays, and that's maybe something I did not take into account before the season. But he does not have the talents at the linebacking position, and that's really hurting this defense so far. So we'll see if they turn around. But at 1-4, their season is over. With Bradley Chubb out, this defense is going to be a mediocre unit, I think, for the remainder of the season. Moving on to my next disappointment, it has to be Mitch Trubisky and this Bears offense that, I was expecting them to take another step this year going to year 2 under Matt Nagy with Mitch Trubisky going into his 3rd season as the starter. But so far, when you look at Mitch and his production so far this season, I think it's safe to say that he's regressed in his 2nd season under Nagy. When you look at his stats, he's thrown for 588 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 81 passer rating. That's not what you want to see from your young quarterback. And, it's a lot of the same mistakes that we saw last season from Mitch Trubisky, especially early on in the year in the first 3 games where, the processing speed, the ability to go through his reads, the inconsistency with his accuracy, the inconsistency with his decision-making, all that stuff is there once again. And it's frustrating because you expect him to be better at this stage in his career, and you expect that linear trajectory towards his development into a franchise-level quarterback, and we're not seeing that. And it looked like he was starting to turn things around with that game against Washington where he threw 3 touchdown passes. He had that amazing throw to Taylor Gabriel down the right sideline on a 40-yard throw in the second quarter. And, I thought that was going to be something that where he can kind of build on that and build some momentum so far this season. But he had that injury against the Vikings to his shoulder. Thankfully, it wasn't to his throwing shoulder, which would have effectively ended his season. Right now, it sounds like he's going to be back for their next game in a couple of weeks against the New Orleans Saints. They have the bye week this upcoming week. We'll see if he's healthy and ready to go for that. It's going to be tough because he's not the only reason why this Bears offense is struggling. And right now, the Bears are ranked 30th in the NFL in total offense. The only 2 offenses worse than the Bears right now are the Dolphins and the Jets. Dolphins, we know they aren't even trying to win. And then the Jets, they're a dumpster fire because Sam Darnold's been out due to mono. So that has been frustrating to see. To me, the Bears offense, the reason why they're struggling, it's not because of the quarterback play. And I know everyone wants to jump on Chase Daniel and Mitch Trubisky for not playing up to expectations, and I get it. They haven't played well so far this year, but the offensive line is a big, massive problem. Kyle Long, he looks absolutely washed up at the right guard position. Charles Leno has fallen off a cliff at left tackle. He looks like nowhere the same player that he was last season. He leads the league in penalties right now. Missing blocks, not holding up in pass protection consistently. They switched Cody Whitehair and James Daniels at the center and left guard position respectively. And, James Daniels looks like a young player trying to adjust to that position. Cody Whitehair's been fine, in my opinion. Bobby Massey at right tackle has been fine, in my opinion. But the offensive line has just been a huge issue. They can't run the ball. They're among the worst in yards per carry on the ground, and that has nothing to do with David Montgomery and their running backs. It just has to do with the fact that this offensive line, they cannot impose their will on opposing defenses. They can't create holes in the running game, and teams are just dominating them in pass protection right now. And it's really screwing up their offense because when you watch the film on this offense, their receivers are getting open down the field. Allen Robinson is open on every play. Anthony Miller, whenever he gets an opportunity, he's open on pretty much every single play. And, whether it's the quarterback missing him or the offensive line not giving the quarterback enough time to be able to go through the reads and get the ball to those guys, it's really holding them back right now. So I'm hoping Matt Nagy on the bye week and this team can figure it out. But, man, they've been rough so far this season. And then my last disappointment is probably my biggest disappointment. the Atlanta Falcons, starting off 1-4. I thought this was a team that was going to be in the race in the NFC South to win that division, but so far hasn't been the case. Matt Ryan statistically hasn't been bad, but he certainly hasn't had a great year. Throwing for 1,655 yards, 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, which is, I think, more than last season so far. I might be wrong on that, but regardless, he has a 95.1 passer rating, which is most certainly down from last year. And that's kind of concerning when you look at the fact that I think they still have the most talented wide receiving core in the NFL with Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Mohamed Sanu, even Devontae Freeman out of the backfield. They have guys that can make plays with the ball in their hands and that guys that can get open and make contested catches. And for whatever reason, they're just not getting it done. But it's not all on the offense. That defense has been really bad so far this season. Whether it's injuries or just a lack of talent, a lack of coaching philosophy, they're not getting it done. They're starting off a lot of these games very slow, and they've had to come from behind with their passing game in the second halves in pretty much every single game, and it's not working. So, you have to question whether Dan Quinn, their current head coach, whether this is his last year coaching this team, whether he's on a hot seat right now. It certainly looks like if they don't turn things around and turn things around dramatically later this season, that he's going to be out of a job come February when the season ends. So in terms of my award predictions, transitioning over to that, overall, when I look at the MVP conversation, I thought it was going to be Patrick Mahomes in the first couple weeks of the year, but now as the season has kind of gone along so far, Russell Wilson, nobody talks about him for some reason, but it's him and Mahomes. Those guys are on a completely different level right now, and Russell Wilson has been extraordinary this season. 12 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And he's leading the Seahawks right now to a 4-1 record. He's just been fantastic this year, and he doesn't get enough credit for how good he is and how great he is. I mentioned it earlier how, the Seahawks, they do have improved weapons on offense, but I wouldn't say they have an offense on the level of the Chiefs where they just have speed and playmakers all over the place. It really is Russell Wilson carrying this unit behind a great running game, of course, as well as Chris Carson. But Russell Wilson has just done everything for this team so far this year, and he's the reason why they are my favorites in the NFC West. In terms of the Offensive Player of the Year, I think you have to go with Christian McCaffrey. He really is the reason the Panthers are 3-2 right now. He leads the NFL in both rushing yards and total yards from scrimmage. And that's despite playing with a mediocre offensive line and mediocre quarterback play, even though Kyle Allen has been solid in his 3 starts so far. Christian McCaffrey has been incredible so far. I really hope he gets recognition for how great he is because he's a fantastic player. My Defensive Player of the Year, I could go with Shaquille Barrett, who's been really awesome so far this season, but I think as the year kind of goes along, his stats are going to start to, and his production overall is going to start to dwindle a little bit and kind of regress to the mean, so to speak. I have to go with Khalil Mack because, to me, he's the best player on the most dominant defense in the NFL. I know they didn't play like it last week against the Raiders, but Mack, when you look at what he's done so far this season, 4.5 sacks, leading the league with 4 forced fumbles, and at this point, 24 pressures on the quarterback so far this season. He's a guy that is constantly in the backfield making a difference for this Bears defense. And this is a Bears defense that hasn't been healthy so far this year. Akeem Hicks has been injured all season long, basically. Missing the last couple of games. Roquan Smith missed the game against the Vikings. They're missing Bilal Nichols on the defensive line. Not the perfect situation like it was last year for the Chicago Bears defense. And Khalil Mack is the one difference maker, always making plays throughout games. So I think he's going to, when the year kind of goes along, he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year. He's been extraordinary this season. Comeback Player of the Year, I'm going with Carson Wentz. And his season, first year coming off of really 2 injuries when you think about it, with the ACL and the back injury that he suffered last season. He's playing efficient football once again. He has the Eagles playing very well. Their defense is inconsistent. They're dealing with injuries. The running game comes here and there. But through it all, Carson Wentz has been a consistent presence on that offense. and he's the reason why they are 3-2 as well, and playing very efficiently. And I hope he can continue to stay healthy this year, because that's really the only question with Wentz is, can he stay healthy for a 16-game season? But when he is healthy, he's one of the best in the league at the quarterback position. And I think if he stays healthy for the entire year, he's a guy that will win the Comeback Player of the Year award, because he's showing why a lot of people were considering him an MVP in 2017, because he's been very, very good this year so far. My offensive rookie of the year, Gardner Minshew. Clearly, he's a guy that sparked the mediocre Jaguars team to where they are now, where they're in a position to fight for a division title in the AFC South. I think he's proven so far that he should replace Nick Foles as the quarterback going forward. He's gotten the most out of guys like DJ Chark in that passing game. Really has just been a fantastic player for them. He had that comeback victory against the Broncos a couple weeks ago. He just looks fantastic right now, and we'll see. He's a guy that I'm definitely rooting for. He just looks like a dude you just want to have a beer with. So I'm hoping that he can continue to get that playing time in Jacksonville. As for my defensive rookie of the year, it has to be Brian Burns. Even though it is close between him and Darnell Savage, I think those are the two rookies that have had the biggest impact on their respective teams. Although you could make a case for Nick Bosa as well. Nick Bosa has been very good, even though the stat sheet doesn't always tell you that. But Brian Burns, to me, he's making the most impact out of the rookies so far, and he looks fantastic as a pass rusher in this Carolina Panthers defense. So overall, those are my thoughts so far for the first few weeks of the NFL season. Let me know what you guys are looking for in the NFL so far this year in the comment section below. Please leave a like and subscribe if you're a fan of this content and this channel as a whole. Thanks, guys, for watching.